I'm Vicki Butler-Henderson, and this is the Historics Auctioneers Refuel Podcast. I am joined, as ever, by auction expert Mathew Priddy.
Hello.
Hello. And today we are going to be talking about where the smart money is with classic cars right now, and basically have a good general look at the state of the market.
Buying or selling a classic car? Head to historics.co.uk or click below for a free valuation.
So a very warm welcome, and just before we crack on, Matthew has got something very important to say.
As always, yes, please, if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, Instagram, listening to it on your dog walk, I've taken that line from you.
Dog walk.
Please do click, like, follow, everything you need to do, because the more you watch, the more you contribute to this, the more we can make, of course. So please do make sure that all of your social media channels are following, looking and clicking and everything else.
And a special hello if you're listening in a tractor. Hi. So, we are joined this week by a contributing editor to the Telegraph and a man who gives excellent consumer advice on all things cars. He is Alex Robbins.
Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome. So, Alex, how would you sum up the state of affairs for the car market in this first quarter, the beginning of 2025?
Well, it's an interesting one, really, because I think there's a lot of people sort of holding their breath and waiting to see what happens. Obviously, there are some really big political movements which have ramifications for the car market. I think a lot of manufacturers are kind of wondering whether to start battening down the hatches, wondering whether to have to rethink their supply chains and so on and so forth. So I think there's sort of this cautious kind of limbo and waiting for the other shoe to drop at the moment in the industry, which obviously isn't that great for product planning.
All at a time that they're having to juggle the powertrain, the electric versus the hybrid versus the diesel versus the petrol. It's not ideal for them, is it?
I don't think it's possible to understate how hard it is to be a maker of cars at the moment.
I mean, normally it's just, I need to make something new and pretty everyone's going to like, but now you have to make new, pretty, affordable, that works with whatever powertrain everyone wants to do. It's not ideal.
Exactly. And for legacy European manufacturers as well, there's the added challenge of new imports from China, which are kind of mudding the waters as well. So there's an awful lot to think about for them, and I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Let's put it that way.
No, you're right. It's. Well, dare I say, people should just buy classic cars at auction, shouldn't they? Or tractors.
Or tractors, exactly. Just to paint the picture at the minute for the UK car industry, I thought I'd give some flesh to the bones. So almost 2 million new cars were bought in the UK last year. So that's the kind of market that we're talking about for new cars, which was just a 2.6% increase over the year before. And what was our best-selling new car last year in the UK?
Would have been the Ford Puma.
Ding, ding. Yes,
Whoa.
absolutely. Yeah, the Ford Puma.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And electric cars, guess how many electric cars were sold in 2024?
Oh, that I don't know.
300,000.
Very good.
Was it?
Yeah, almost 400,000 actually electric cars were sold. So that just, for all of the headlines and the talk that we say about electric cars, out of 2 million, just 400,000. It's not as big a story potentially as the headlines make out.
Do you think those electric cars are what's driving the growth, i.e. people feeling like they have to go in electric cars? They have to get out of whatever they're in now and go and get an electric car, which is maybe fluffing on top of normal car sales.
I think that if you're a company car person in a scheme, then you are definitely going to
tax advantages.
Exactly, you get money, you get
That's
relief.
Exactly right. But I think that's causing a knock-on problem for the second-hand car market, because what you're getting is a lot of those electric cars that are then coming out of those schemes onto the second-hand market. Second-hand buyers are much more reluctant to make that switch, and we're seeing huge drops in second-hand values for those electric cars as they sort of fall off the end of those schemes.
So, Alex, what's the answer for the second-hand electric car market?
I mean, my gut feel is that historically there's been quite a lot of support for the new car market in the transition to EVs from the government. That's now ended. Obviously, it ended a few years ago, but nobody's ever really looked at support for the second-hand market. I'm not clever enough to know how you'd work such a thing, but there's definitely a sense that incentivizing buyers or company car users particularly
to choose
electric cars is great, but it only works if you then have a pathway for what happens to those cars after they've come out of those schemes, like as you mentioned. Because obviously, if they then fall off those schemes and drop in value, it's going to increase the lease costs, and it becomes a vicious cycle that then makes actually electric cars a much more difficult choice
to buy from
new. Exactly,
because
right.
you're dealing with a much higher depreciation level, which is always been it's always been the cost of a new car. It's not just the new car, the finance if you financed it, and so on. It's the fact that you know full well there's a certain amount of depreciation, when that always used to be the case of everyone then was buying that nearly new, thinking, right, the lion's share of depreciation's gone, I'll buy now, it should slow down for me. But as you say, at the moment, they drop into the floor. I mean, the polarised one is things like the Taycan, whereby we know full well they're all bought by business owners, but the second-hand market for them is not there because the incentives don't exist.
Well, exactly. And there is actually a school of thought that now is actually a very good time to buy a 3-4-year-old electric car.
Because theoretically, it can't get any worse, because at some point, I would imagine the government are going to have to stimulate this and help this. Otherwise, they're just going to become a real problem.
Either that, or market forces will kick in and they will just get so cheap that people will buy them anyway. You know, and I don't know whether we've reached that point yet or not, but if we have, then now's a really good time to buy, because eventually fewer and fewer people will be scared of taking on an electric car, adoption will increase, and that huge precipitous drop we're seeing in after that, those first few years will start to level off.
So that's really interesting. So it almost mimics the classic sort of side of things, whereby we've had this sort of, I'd say, roller coaster 2 years, really. A lot of it similarly to do with political aspects of the marketplace, people's confidence, cost of living, so on and so forth. And that now is sort of rounded back to being a very good time to buy. And in a similar vein, is it now at their lowest ebb, and thus if you purchase something well now, is it going to be something that's good to hold on to? And it's the same sort of metric. How many people are going to sit on their hands for how long? Are you going to miss the boat?
Yeah, and I also wonder with classics at the moment whether a lot of people who are buying, historically there was a far greater, or a lot of people were quite happy to splash the cash and buy something. Certainly as you mentioned when we talked pre-show, in the COVID period, a lot of people were quite happy to buy. It doesn't matter about the cost, because they saw the prices increasing and thought, well, it's fine. It'll always carry on like that. Now that it hasn't, people are a lot more worried about being bitten. So while they're not necessarily looking to make money, they're looking not to lose money.
To lose so much money.
Exactly.
Yeah. And say, with everything costing a bit more, everyone's that much more reticent to just go out there and think, I'll just lose it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
exactly right.
as we all know, it's almost easier to save money than it is to make money.
Yeah.
And thus, maybe I won't do that, maybe I won't do this. It's very similar in tracking with the classic market, because people have very much been nervous about purchasing, but then equally that has to transmit to people selling.
Yeah.
People have to take advice, look at the market, and realistically, if they want to sell, or if they need to sell, they need to be looking at what's the realistic price. The worst thing, I think, is if your car sits on the market, or, for instance, goes to too many sales, because in effect the confidence drops away. But if you price something correctly, there is a market still available to buy, and there are people canny enough to know that this is the time to purchase.
Yeah.
But it needs that stimulus, really, I think, as well. I mean, we're in a position where we've got the first year of a new government who probably want to get all the bad news out of the way quick.
Yeah.
Theoretically, in my mind, come next year or end of this year, that sort of narrative should change. And then for both sides of the market, both modern and classic, people's confidence might start returning, and then prices will naturally move forward. From a classic point of view, it's the weight of buyers for one car. It's not necessarily what the car's worth per se, and we still see cars make epic amounts of money if they're very collectible and there's only one of them and there's still 5 people that can buy them. There may have been 10, but 5 to 1 is still a good ratio to make a very good price. However, if you've got one of 100 cars online and there's now only 50 buyers, whereas there may have been 150, of course, that's where we see the buyer's market develop.
Yeah.
So I agree, actually. I'm thinking now maybe I should go and buy myself a second-hand Taycan. It's come as cheap as possible, isn't it?
Now's the time.
Yeah.
What strong sectors would you be looking at right now, do you think?
Well, in a classic.
Yeah, in classics.
In a classic one, I mean, to be playing the future a little bit and sort of playing the next 10 years and looking at what those trends would be. And typically that tracks age groups, as we know, but also versus cars that may be struggling to sell as we speak. So dare I say, I don't want to put mockers on anything, because you even see the pre-war cars and early cars actually having a bit of a renaissance at the moment. But that's probably because they went so far, everyone suddenly think, actually, they're great things to own. But you still got to be looking at sort of 80s. Theoretically, the right 80s car has got 10 years legs in it from a point of view of who wants it, when they want it, or what stage of life they want it. 50s, 60s cars are a bit spooky at the moment, but again, that makes them incredibly good value. These are cars that were bought for £100,000 a year and a half ago that you can possibly pick up for 60, 70.
Could you give us a few examples?
I don't know. Can you imagine the poor people writing and like, don't say my car, don't say my car. There are obvious examples. You only have to track the results. Dare I say it, E-types, because there are a number of them, unless you've got something particularly good, well restored, then ultimately they've come off the boil again because of less buyers. More come to market. Porsche have done amazingly well. You can't have any more because there's no shortage of Porsche at all. But they've held their prices. But they're still lower than perhaps they could have been. Traditionally, they're such a solid brand to buy into. So you buy yourself a 911, and theoretically, you're going to be pretty solid on values. Don't take my advice. I'm not giving you consumer. Do not come back to me and say my Porsche dropped £10,000. But yeah, there's a few that you can track. You can track the sort of prices, but I'm nervous about anything in the 50s unless it's particularly special at the moment.
From the 1950s.
Yeah.
Okay.
60s is still a very saleable sort of time. I think people look at that with fond memories, and they look at the car design of that era and they like that. And 70s and 80s theoretically are sort of 70s. They should be having their boom now, but they're struggling because everyone's struggling.
As a classic car fan, Alex, what would you be looking at? What era or specific model?
I mean, I still think 80s and particularly 90s as well is a really good growth area.
And why do you think that is?
As you mentioned, it's to do with the kinds of people who are buying those cars. It's the kinds of people who had those cars on their bedroom wall are now coming to a point where they've got the cash to splash on those cars. Yeah. And I think particularly those bedroom wall, not even just those bedroom wall cars, but the cars that were kind of iconic, the cars that went in Top Gear magazine as it formed in the 90s, and won the group tests, and everybody said, oh yeah, well I want that, Do
you know one car that did? The Ford Puma.
Yes.
But the reincarnation, the original one, the Ford Puma, that was a fantastic one.
The upper end of the market is starting to show that track already. So, I would say upper end, sort of middle upper, let's say into the hundreds and 150s. Test Rosses are suddenly starting to become popular. Well, because they were cheap for ages. I mean, the F40 was always strong, but again, that's going stratospheric. Countach is stratospheric. These are all things. Integrales, they're making good money. We've got an Escort Cosworth in here. Escort Cosworths, of course. So all of those cars are at the top end, proving that point. It's just the bit below it. But to your point on 90s cars, the problem when you get to 90s is people start obsessing about the mileage, and the mileage becomes a factor.
Is that because it's a more modern car?
Yeah, they were built in greater numbers, not necessarily things like Cosworth, but when they're a homologation or something in small numbers, you're fine to a point, although let's say the lower mileage one will always make the most. But anything else, cars are built in much greater numbers, and thus you need to find something that defines yours from every other one on the marketplace, and mileage is the easiest one. And I always say on it, I don't like it, because mileage on a car could have done twice the amount of miles, but it could have been far better maintained, in far better condition. But the money will go to the one with 10, not 20,000 miles, which isn't quite right to me. And in 30, 40 years' time, no one gives a stuff because they've had a new engine rebuild, restored, what have you. Yeah,
no, fair enough. We are talking to you just ahead of our Farnborough sale, and we have got that Ford Escort in. It hasn't even done 3,000 miles, Ford Escort Cosworth, and that is on for about between 140 and 160,000 pounds, I think is the estimate.
Yeah, I think it's punchy money, but I've seen them sell at that rate.
Absolutely.
And because there's only so many left, and the ones that have sold, let's say there's 10 to 20 of those really low mileage cars available, I've probably seen most of them sell in the last 4 or 5 years. So there's not many left that aren't probably being tucked away. Yeah. But it's a hell of a lot of money for an Escort.
I know. But at the other end of it, and I think if you can hear anything, that might be a jet going over us. As I say, Farnborough, this is where we are. And then perhaps at the other end of the scale, you've got lovely iconic cars like the 205 GTI, going for sort of 15,000, 16,000 pounds potentially.
Yep, exactly. And I think you can add to that things like Mark 1 Mazda MX-5s as well, which are to your point, there are still a lot of them around, but there's going to come a point when a lot of people, I mean, they suffer with rust problems really, really badly. And you're going to find that fewer and fewer people are willing to do those repairs.
Yep.
They have already gone up in price, but I still think there's room for them to go eventually.
But you'll
'cause they are
find
so
that
iconic.
people will start to restore.
Yes,
And
true.
then there becomes a renaissance of the
Okay.
car brands. And that always comes out. And rust is something that we won't see with more modern cars, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's almost, dare I say, it almost creates that sort of ability for something.
Yeah.
Because what'll happen is lots and lots of Mazda MX-5s, lots and lots will just disappear.
Yep.
What remains will become better and then become more collectible.
Mm-hmm.
It almost needs that.
How much does a brand new car have any sort of impact on the classic car market? For example, the latest Mini comes out. What effect does that have on?
It works both ways. Brands help. Brands work with each other. I mean, you go to Goodwood at the Festival of Speed, and there'll be plenty about old cars and new cars, and they'll use that to fuel the purchases. And in the same way that the original Mini fuels the sales of the new Mini, a new Lotus turns eyes towards an old Elan. If it's a cool brand, people will then buy into it, and they'll buy things that they remember. So I think they are intrinsically linked. One brand can sort of scupper the moderns, can scupper the classic. The classic can also scupper the modern. If you've got a brand that was always known. I mean, I always find this weird. Skodas. So Skodas has become the latest sort of middle class wagon for carrying your kids around. But remember, when I grew up, you wouldn't be seen dead in them.
Quite.
Well, Skoda have spent fortunes over the years to sort of almost eradicate that brand and sort of get to their point where they are now. But that all came from the old people in our heads, what we remember. Skodas and Ladas, we used to always sell, and I wouldn't own one of those. Now everyone's got them. And they're Volkswagens.
Yeah, exactly.
To your point, I'm going to be quite interested to see what happens to Renault 5 values now that you've got the
Yes.
new electric Renault 5 and the Alpine coming through.
It's bang on.
5 GT turbos, for
Yep.
example, are going to be a really interesting one to watch. I don't know whether they are going to go up in value, whether that new car will have a pull on the values of the old.
I'll tell you now, they will almost certainly go up.
But
Wouldn't surprise me.
it 100% has got an emotional pull for
Sure.
me because the Renault 5 and the electric version of it has got so many wonderful nods to the old petrol-powered GT turbo. It is a lovely sort of circle,
Yeah.
and if I could go and find
You've got to find it.
GT
The problem with
turbo.
the problem with find a GT turbo, one that hasn't been blown up 5 times
In a hedge.
or rusted.
Quite.
But again, that comes down to that same thing as with classics. It comes down to when there's fewer of them, they then bounce in value, and then people start pulling them out of sheds
Yep.
and restoring them, don't they? So
Yeah.
it then sort of creates that renaissance.
Oh, loved just a road full of
That is,
5
yeah.
GT turbos. Be
Imagine.
lovely. Right, we shall move on, I think, to the broader forces affecting the market. And dare I say the word ULEZ and the word Trump
In our
and anything like that.
in our catalogues now, if something's more modern and it's ULEZ compliant, it will be in the bullet point because being closer to London, it's absolutely killed some people.
Well, just to say, so ULEZ, ultra low emission zone, which are in London pretty much within the M25, throughout other cities as well, as far as sort of Aberdeen and Edinburgh. £12.50 for cars is the charge
Per day.
coming into London, per day. If you stray anywhere in Scotland, you get in Aberdeen you get a £60 fine for bringing the wrong car in. So that you don't even
Don't even get a chance.
you don't even get a chance.
It's
No,
just
that's
about-
it. And just to let you know that if you've got a petrol car anywhere sort of before 2006, you're going to have to pay a shed load of money. Anything after 2006, you're ULEZ compliant. And with diesels, that cut-off is 2015 roughly.
It's like Euro whatever, isn't it? And
Yeah, Euro 6 for
Yeah.
diesel, Euro
So
4
I had
for
a
petrol.
C-Class Mercedes that was £30 a year to tax. I made them take it monthly. So it was so efficient, the tax was only £30. So efficient that they wanted to reward me with low tax, but they wouldn't let me go into London, ULEZ. So how does that work?
I can speak to this because we actually, the houses opposite us in the road are the border for the ULEZ.
Oh.
So
Really?
we are literally just outside the ULEZ. But if you go one way on our road, you enter the ULEZ.
I was going to say, if you can only go left, can't go right.
Exactly. But I'm very fortunate because at the moment all our cars are ULEZ compliant. So, and it was I have to admit, it was a deciding factor in me choosing to change from a 90s car to a 1970 car, because that 1970 car is now exempt because, of course, it's a historic car. And we have a family car which is a diesel, but it's Euro 6, as you mentioned, so that's compliant, and a petrol convertible which is Euro 4. So they all fit, and they kind of skirt round the ULEZ. But that's an example of a buying decision that has pushed me into something older and something newer, instead of what I would consider probably is my heartland when I was growing up was those 80s and 90s cars. But I do think I could buy one because I would rarely actually drive it in the ULEZ because it would be a toy.
But it's in your
It does
head.
make you think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And sometimes silly, isn't it? We were talking about the other day about having 2 cars or 3 cars in the house, buying a third car. But then you think, because I could buy that, just use that, and then I buy myself what I want there. But people think that way, and they think, but I've got to tax it twice, I've got to insure it twice. Yep. And so you end up those little intrinsic costs keep adding up. They just tip you onto the scale one way or the other.
Yeah, particularly if you do actually live in the ULEZ.
Totally, yeah.
At which point it doesn't become a case of, well, in my case, I can drive somewhere else.
Yeah.
But if you live within it, you're stuck.
Well, yeah, £12 a day for going to the shopping, that's a bit much, isn't it?
But it does blow my mind that you can buy an old classic car with a big V8 engine and not pay anything at all.
Absolutely mental, isn't it?
And long may it last.
Yeah, don't knock it.
No. So what about global trades and Trump tariffs? Because I know that at the minute, as we speak, it's 10% charge on anything made in the UK and sold.
Not on classic cars.
No.
But modern cars.
Cars, yep.
So what is
classic
the
cars,
story with classic cars?
So it's that standard old thing that they sort of managed to keep under the load, keep it that way. It's the same with capital gains and things like that, isn't it? So they are exempt by their age.
And what is that age? What is our cut-off?
I think it's 25 years.
25 years
old. And I think that's defined by, there is and I could be wrong on this, I'd need to check my facts, but I believe there's a minimum kind of import age in America before a car is allowed to be imported.
Correct. Yep.
And I think that's 25 years. And
you get a lot of it. So a lot of the Japanese JDM market cars, which they boost in value suddenly when they're allowed to be going into the States, because there's quite a niche sort of following over there for those. So that, again, the same. We had lots with Land Rovers. As soon as Land Rover's 25 years, they want them.
Well, and Jaguar Land Rover at the minute have currently said we are not sending any new cars over there at the moment, which is the American market is a massive deal for them.
It's huge. And, for them and for Bentley and for, a lot of our manufacturers.
We see it from our perspective. We don't necessarily see it sort of direct line of sight because obviously Classic's been exempt from that. But what you have seen is a lot of people and it's Trump sort of has really hit this hard recently, but people's shares, savings, their money, their businesses are all being affected by this geopolitical sort of turmoil. And again, that hampers us from a point of view of just confidence of whether they should spend their money. So if everything's going left, right and centre and they're not quite sure whether they won't spend their money, and thus classic prices can suffer from that respect. So we don't see it directly, but we see it very quickly in an indirect fashion, because we'll speak to a client who's got a lot of money in shares and investments, who would have lost fortunes on the stock markets that week, and thus straight away it's clammed up, or maybe I shouldn't spend. I mean, it's always usually a bit relevant because it turns around and next week they make double the amount on the rest of the same thing if they've got new investment people. But indirect as well as direct influences because of all of that craziness and whatever he shouts on Twitter, X.
There is kind of a parallel as well, as you were talking about earlier, wherein, with new cars, a lot of the really high-end manufacturers, the kind of the one-offs or the 20-offs, they're less affected because the kind of people who are buying those, they have that money anyway, and they're less directly affected by the geopolitical situations. And I imagine that's fairly similar in the classic car scene as well.
People can take advantage of it and but it just affects confidence. It's a confidence game, classic cars. Yeah. We say that it shouldn't be. You forget the money, you buy what you want because you want it.
Sure.
But there's always that secondary thought, much like when you were buying a car and thought about ULEZ.
Yeah.
It's in the back of their mind. They want to buy it. They don't really want it to lose money, which isn't really why you should be buying it. You should buy it because you really, really want it. You've earned money in your life. You really fancied a 911, let's say, and you go out and you buy it. But the problem is that they'll be constantly thinking about what it's going to be worth. What's it? Just get over it.
Have you ever bought a car on the basis that it will make you money?
Yeah, I have professionally, but personally, no.
Which car did you?
I would tend to always buy Vangonomics. I've sort of bought low mileage, more modern classics where I think I'm clever enough to be ahead of the game. Turns out I wasn't there. It was a lot of work for £500, which I'm pretty certain I spent in advertising and cleaning, to be honest with you. But
Alex, have you ever done that? Have you ever bought something for money?
I wouldn't say for money, but I have managed to make money on something not through judgment but through luck.
Yeah. What was it?
It would have been about 2015. I bought an E24 BMW 635 CSI.
Lovely.
Highline. It was in royal blue, which is lovely metallic blue, cream leather. I adored that car. I had it for 5 years, and I kept up with the maintenance. I found a good BMW specialist who looked after it. I think I bought it on about 105,000 miles, and by the time I sold it, it had done 120,000. My wife and I drove it around France. We had fun in it, and that's, to your point, that's why you should be buying these things. We got to enjoy the car, and I think I bought it for, I think I got the last cheap one. I bought it for £4,500.
Yeah, quite possibly, yeah.
And by the time I sold it in 5 years later, so 2020, it was COVID times as well, so it was when things were going up. I think I sold it for around 15, something along those lines. So I did quite well out of that.
Yeah.
I've then since lost it all on.
I was going to say
on everything else.
Owning
you get
a classic
overconfident, thinking, well,
exactly.
I know this now.
Absolutely, I definitely got built up on my.
I know what I'm doing. Look at what I've just done.
Absolutely, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and then
yes.
Well,
reality hits.
Yeah. Hopefully you can give us some auction insights now and work out or explain to us sort of real world sale prices as opposed to the estimates. How do they come together? And when we are looking to buy
estimates are a funny thing because they're, dare I say it, guide prices estimates. You've got to bear in mind that at auctions they're also part of what's dealt with the seller. So you can turn around and say to someone that thinks their car might be worth £20,000, it's worth 10, but the likelihood is they won't want to do business with you because they'll run away, they'll run the other way. If they're miles off it, we won't deal with them, in that fairness. If they generally think their car's worth more than we think it's worth, it's just not, it's too expensive for us to run a big show and put that car if we don't think there's a cat and house chance it's going to sell. But when you get into that sort of realm where you're close, you think that's possible, they think that's possible, the estimate should be where we think the car could sell. Now, in a downturn market, you'll often find that low-end estimates or below are being achieved rather than high, because ultimately people's expectations are usually higher than the reality. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just that as things are moving down, people don't adjust as quick as that. And they like to think theirs is the last best car. So you'll often find in a downturn market the low-end estimates have been achieved, until, of course, you get that little nugget of a car that everyone still has to have. Now, what do we get now? We get about 70% sales rate, and I would suggest half, if not 60% of that will be in or above, and the rest will come at the bottom end. And I don't necessarily like to beat people up on that across the auction industry, because an estimate is just that. It's an estimate, it's a guide. It's not what the car is worth, it's what that person that consigned it believes it's worth. And that will be with a conversation with the vendor, research, what they generally think the car can achieve. But it's worth mentioning that, you know, when you see an auction estimate and you're purchasing a car, that doesn't mean you have to be there. That doesn't mean that if it says 15 to 20 and you only want to pay 13, that doesn't mean don't bid. That does not mean that. Look, you might not bid it, and the chances are you won't win it, but it's worth bidding it, because in this market you just don't know. And also sometimes we get it wrong. Not me, I never get anything wrong. But we do get it wrong sometimes. So, yeah, don't be put off by those estimates. Real world prices are a lot different to what you see advertised, and that would come down to your classifieds as well. I mean, you bear in mind dealerships have to make a good turn, they have to keep the lights on. People will always ask for more money, and then someone will come along and buy it, generally for less money, but they don't publish that. Only auction houses publicise that. So you pinch of salt. You know, you're a buyer. It's still a buyer's market. If you're a seller of a good car, you can still get good money, but don't get too hung up on them. You know, do your own research as well. But equally, it should give you a fair idea.
It's a bit like that in the new car world, isn't it? Because dealers suddenly have a big promotion. You can, you know, get a couple of grand off the retail price of a car.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's your point about, I think with the nearly new cars as well, particularly, it's very easy to look at those the prices those cars are selling for and be sort of deluded as to how much they're actually going for.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things you can do is go into the dealers and start talking to them and actually go and ask the questions.
You've got to bear in mind, if a car is really popular, and there was years ago when the Overs, the 911 GG3s that were making over the money, the Range Rovers, because there was a wait list, those times have kind of gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, there will be some cars that are popular, and thus they'll get list price because that's what they want, because that's what they're going to get, and they know they've got someone else to buy it. Most cars aren't like that. Most franchises have to buy a set amount of cars to get the decent amount of profit margin, and they will often have too many of those cars. Sorry, I'm giving their secrets away, but it's not that hard. So there are deals to be done. Yeah. They need to sell cars. And they want you in the brand.
Yeah. And particularly if you're buying the cars they have too much of, which is why you see so many of a particular specification on the road. Because what will happen is a buyer will go into a dealer and say, well, I want an SE in red.
Yeah.
And the dealer will say, well, we've got about 6 M Sports in grey that we need shifted. So we'll give you £2,000 off and it's here. Whereas if you have the SE in red, you have to wait.
That's always been my best piece of advice to anyone buying more modern cars. If you go in there with a concept, I want that, and that, you're paying through the nose.
True.
Buy a new car.
Yep.
If you go into it and say, I need a car that needs to do this, this and this, and they're quite varying degrees, and you're not too brand specific, you're not too colour specific, I get it, no one wants a bright orange Ford Fiesta, I don't know.
I'd have a bright orange Ford Fiesta.
But generally speaking, if you turn around and said, look, whatever it is, I just want the right car, you can get a good deal. The moment you start going and specifying, it's almost like in the classic world where you need to have matching numbers, low mileage, bump, price goes up.
Yeah, it's true. But then the flip side to that is that sometimes, and we do it when you're road testing a new car, you will quite often say, well, actually, the one you want is, going back to my previous analogy, the SE, because the M Sport's got the big wheels and the stiff suspension. It doesn't ride as well. So you're telling your reader, go and buy an SE. But then the flip side to that advice is, if you want to do that, be prepared for the longer wait time. Be prepared to not get that good deal, which is why a lot of people go, well, I'll just have the M Sport anyway. Then don't really care about the way it rides.
Yeah.
I do. My back's killing
me. Same.
Have there been any specific cars that have gone for way over the estimate in the classic car world?
Lots. Absolutely lots. I mean, that LM Ferrari that I spoke about earlier, that was estimated at 25 million plus and went to 38. There are the niceties. I mean, in a perfect world, I would only have one of ones and one of twos, and then almost always, you've got that ability whereby there's 2 people at least fighting, and the price just goes to wherever it can be. But that's not the reality. There's not enough of those cars to sustain any industry. But there are, this weekend we will sell, dare I say it, probably 10 to 15 cars way above estimate. It's quite funny because it's you're completely wrong, but in a really good way.
You can never predict which ones.
It's the way you want to be. And it's, oh, sorry, I got that completely wrong. It's okay. I've got another £10,000 in my pocket. Oh, sorry. You don't really see thanked for it because you're wrong if you're right, if that makes sense. But there will always be those cars, and sometimes it doesn't make any rhyme or reason. Sometimes you're sitting there scratching your head, going, "Why on earth?" We sold an XJR supercharged last auction. Lovely car, nothing. I'd say it was all right. It was 50,000 miles, nice spec. It's the later car with aluminium bodied, the one that everyone says is a nice car, but it's an old big car now. I thought mid-teens, maybe even low teens, realistically, and it made nearly £30,000. What that did now is kickstarted 1 million XJRs suddenly come to the market, of course. But what it also can do is it can signal a seed change of values in those cars and popularity in those cars. And to the point, it goes back to that, a lot of them are ULEZ.
Of course.
So suddenly you can smoke around in a supercharged 4.2 litre saloon that looks a bit like a bank robber, and you're not paying the ULEZ charge, and it's still got lots of toys, so everyone suddenly jumps on them.
Yeah.
Do you reckon there's a lot of people who do what I do, which is they see an auction result and they go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, and then they go and check the ULEZ checker, and then they go, oh, I could do that.
Yeah.
And suddenly it hadn't occurred to them before.
See, the electric car manufacturers, electric car people have tried to do it for a while. Stick electric something in a Beetle and you can drive it around London.
Yeah.
It's about the sound thing. Come on, buy a classic and drive it around London. It's far more, you're not going fast. Nope. Everyone looks at you and thinks you're really cool. Let's be honest. If you drive a brand new Range Rover, no one thinks you're cool. If you drive an old classic Jaguar, trust me, everyone's looking at you thinking they're cool.
You've seen it. If you walk around London now, I'm sure the amount of pre-40-year-old cars driving around in London now, I'm sure
must
it's
have
increased.
Gone up. Yeah.
I'm sure it's increased.
I have to have a look and see if we can find out what that is, because I'm sure that's gone up.
Fascinating. Yeah.
When it comes to classics versus sort of collectibles, where would the money be, and where does your heart rule your head, and vice versa?
So individual. The collectible airs on the side of sort of money, really, and how some people will collect because they really have a real sort of panache for a brand, or some people collect Ferraris because they want to have every Ferrari, not because they're necessarily classic, but because they need to have one of each one. But the classics is just you want something that is from a bygone era. You want to enjoy a genuine manual gearbox, a choke. Which, sorry, youngsters, you have no idea what a choke is. Anyone under the age of 30 is going, what are you on about a choke? Wind down windows. Do you remember those? So if you do a classic, it's because you want to drive a classic. I'd think of a classic as jumping in an XK120 and, literally, whatever the weather is, you've got to deal with it. Yep. Brakes, optional, overheating, it's all of that because you want to be involved in that. Whereas I think of a collectible as something that I'm buying because I want to make money on, or buying because I want to collect. It's becoming more of a
business
bit
side
more
of things.
Business side of things.
Yeah. Where do you sit on that, considering you are a man who owns a Saab 9-3 and a project Citroen DS?
Yes.
Is it a Citroen DS?
It's, technically not a Citroen DS, no. I have to say that because I know there will be Citroen DS enthusiasts listening who, when I say it's a D Special, which is the low-spec version of the DS, and it lacks certain parts of the hydropneumatic system that they're famous for, will be shouting at their wherever
Please
they're
shout
listening
in
to
the
podcasts.
comments. Just shout loads.
Shout in the comments. Tell me I'm wrong. It's not a DS. It's a D Special. It's a 1970 D Special that I bought because I did the thing that everyone says you shouldn't do, which is to buy a cheap DS, and I took a gamble, and the gamble spectacularly failed.
And did you buy it because you wanted to collect it, or because you wanted to enjoy the classic element?
I think I bought it because I wanted to enjoy the classic element. I've always been a fan of hydropneumatic Citroens, and the DS was always the one. I mean, the SM is the one, but that's very far out of my reach. So the DS, I didn't really know about the SM when I was growing up, so the DS was always the one I wanted. For me, really, it was kind of a bedroom wall car, and I'm now at the age where I can afford one, questionably, because the one I can afford is probably not very good. So yeah, I would say it's more the experience of owning it as a classic. But I suppose it depends how you define a collectible, really. I mean, if you define it by cars you are collecting, there are going to be relatively few people who are going to go out collecting Morris Marinas and Austin Allegros. However, having said that, there's a school of thought that a collectible car is one that has a sort of a headline name that everyone knows, that is really well known, and that people are going to look for particularly in order to buy it.
You can definitely have modern collectible cars, can't you?
Very true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You can't have classic modern cars.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, that's
Ooh.
there you go. Well, there's a great definition for you.
I should have just said at the start we'd have done this piece. We could be straight after the quiz.
The quiz then, to round things up. Is everybody ready?
Go on.
Never.
Okay.
Never.
So, just first to chirp in gets the point.
How do we chirp? Do we actually have
Don't
to chirp?
Don't ask Vicki questions like that. You will actually be chirping.
What would be your favourite bird, for example?
God. Yeah, I really regret asking this now. I'd have to go robin.
Robin.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I don't know how a robin speaks.
Well, there we go.
Tweet, aren't
Tweet,
you?
yeah.
Tweet.
I'll do gobble gobble. You do tweet tweet.
Amazing.
Right. What is the first British-made production car? What is the first British-made production car?
Ever.
According to Google.
According to Google. First British-made car.
Just shout
I'm
a
going to say
manufacturer.
nothing just so I don't have to say gobble gobble again.
Yes, Matthew?
I'm just going to throw this game. First British-made.
What classic names have we got?
The first that springs to mind would have to be an Austin of some kind.
Interesting. A little more grand, please.
Oh, a Rolls Royce. Bentley.
Lagonda.
1897 Daimler.
Daimler.
Daimler. I wouldn't have had a Daimler dance.
Name one of the top 3 machines that have been on sale for the longest time. So I'm having a proper in-depth look at the motor industry
So
for my quiz.
when you say machines, like a actual car.
An actual car truck,
Okay.
not a tractor and not a lorry.
That were
Unimog?
produced for the longest amount of time.
Yeah, so name one of the top 3.
Unimog?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you speak, Robin.
Oh, Tweet.
Yes,
Tweet,
Robin,
tweet.
a.k.a. Alex. Yes, Alex.
Unimog.
No.
Ah, well, that was worth it, wasn't it?
No, but keep going.
So gobble gobble. Mini.
No.
So one of those
I know.
is,
I'd say go more American.
okay. Oh, okay.
Do have a think at home, wherever you're listening to us.
There's be trucks in America.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like it's going to be something you would.
Gobble gobble like an F1. It wouldn't be F-150, but like a
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Ford F-Series.
Yeah.
Since 1947.
yeah.
The other 2 that I've got, Chevrolet Suburban since 1935 and the VW Transporter, 1950.
Yeah. That's
I know.
right. Yeah,
Isn't that sweet?
Love that.
Okay, question number.
You have to come with harder. These questions are getting harder and
Yeah,
harder.
I know they are, aren't they? I
Next time you
know.
type in Google,
so sorry.
questions for a children's
children.
quiz.
I'll do that. I'll so happily do that
Yeah.
for you. Hybrid cars are obviously increasingly commonplace and will eventually make their way into the classic car world.
Mm-hmm.
Has that happened yet? I've not seen one yet.
Not classic.
No,
Honda Insight, possibly?
potentially,
No.
but we've not seen
yet.
one
No,
yet.
I think there's a few collectible Ferraris and stuff that have gone in that would have the
some
stuff,
hybrid
but
tech.
I mean not really in classic.
No.
I don't think.
But when was the first hybrid car produced?
Oh, hang on, this is going to be a trick question.
It is, of course it is. I wrote it.
Gobble gobble, 1903 or something.
Oh my gosh, gobble gobble, you're not far wrong. Tweet, have a go.
Tweet 1906.
Oh no, if you'd have gone the other way, we'd have 1901 by,
Go on.
and so 1901, Ferdinand Porsche.
No.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I know.
I'm amazed
I-
they don't make more of that in their
I know,
marketing.
but I drove recently the 911 GTS, which has got some hybrid tech behind it. It is a fantastic
Oh, I
bit
drove
of
one of
kit.
those the other day.
Did you?
Yeah, I was
I
at
say.
Silverstone doing the Porsche thingy and just zipping around in one of those.
Oh, fantastic. And yes, so I sort of made a reference back to that because I was like, who's made the first hybrid car? Because you always think of the Toyota Prius, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
it goes way back. That's amazing. Lovely. Okay, next.
Go on.
In what year was the popular modern hybrid Toyota Prius first sold?
Tweet 1995.
So close.
Gobble gobble, 1994.
Oh, no.
You missed the
Again,
pin?
Gone the other
No,
way.
damn it.
1997. It was first on sale in Japan. Oh, I've got a picture round. This is our final one.
gosh.
Picture on. Yes, picture round. So I have got 2 cars, which are resto-mods. So basically, they are old cars, old classic cars, but with an electric engine. And I know we've spoken about them before. So this one, I want you to guess the price. Oh
my God,
So
who did
this one
that?
here is. I presume you're loving that.
God, who did that?
So this is a Luna's Aston Martin DB6. What do we think the price is on that? Electrified.
800. Oh, gobble gobble, £850,000.
Okay, I like it.
Just because I think they'll overcharge.
Tweet, I was going to say about 650.
Oh
£1,000.
yes, 700 grand.
Yeah.
So well done on that. And then
Ruining
this
it.
one. So this is a David Brown Mini E Mastered is its official name. What do we think about the price on that?
Tweet 150,000.
Oh yeah, bang on. You know.
The bang on us, I can't even go in. Okay.
No, that's it. Yes, and I have driven one, and they are really great, and they do give you that gorgeous feeling of when you're driving around town. You're going, I must look in a shop window because this car is so cute, and it's just
They've always said
got the comfort and the
electric makes more
quietness.
sense small.
Yeah.
I get it. I
Yeah.
get it with a Mini. Don't get it with a DB6. That's just ridiculous.
What happens with investing in resto-mods? Where is the market?
Well, Resto-mods it's a broad sort of spectrum. I mean, years ago, you weren't even allowed to put power brakes on things. It was all no, it must be absolutely original. And then, because basically they were death traps, it was sort of commonplace. It upgraded fans, better brakes, few performance upgrades, even air conditioning if it's hidden nicely, all came in. And that was sort of the early Resto-mod. And now it's sort of really pushing on to being past Resto-mods almost into there's reimagined cars, which is a common word. Is it reimagined?
Yeah, reimagined.
Do you think Singer's played a big part in that?
Massively.
The popularity of Singer
yeah.
has really made it okay, effectively.
There's a couple
So
of
Singer
really,
reimagines 911s, and
Yes.
they're nudging £1 million more.
yeah, I mean, theoretically, they're not 911s, really. There is a lot of... I think E-Types are quite popular. There's lots of... They're reimagined. They're actually E-Types, but they change a few of the aspects, some of the looks, and then they can redo all of the interior. That's quite nice, but again, it's got to be done really well, and then it becomes really expensive, at which point you're like, I should just buy a normal original one, because that got a bit out of control. I think it's become quite commonplace, and it's a lot more, let's say from my era, it's a lot more acceptable, because I grew up, you remember the old Max Power magazines, and people were, we were doing that as kids.
I was on it launching it.
You're
welcome.
Well. So we grew up with that being really prevalent, so maybe as we get older, we really won't be so resistant to it.
No, perhaps. And I think it's interesting you raised the two electric conversions as well, because that's a really interesting area of resto-modding and hugely controversial, obviously. Because obviously not only are you changing the power source, you're changing the whole character of the car.
Well, I always think of this, I always have a rule with this, is if the soul of the car was the engine, you can't do it.
I have the same, which is why I think actually the ideal classic for an electromod conversion is a DS.
I was about to say,
Because
what would you think if... I was thinking along those lines, let you think. Because, ultimately, the engine was just an engine.
Yeah.
It was... Everything else about that car was what was wonderful. The engine was like, whatever. If someone had told me it's this engine, that engine, I'd go, it doesn't matter.
Quite.
Show me the lights moving around and things like that.
And that's literally why I bought a D Special, because I don't care that it's not a Palace or something like that.
Yeah.
I just wanted that shape. And I do think that that's a car that feels like it should always have had an electric powertrain in the first place. And I think that's kind of unique among classic cars.
The only
defo.
sort of slight hiccup in my thinking...
Oh,
because
you're talking yourself out
I'm
of it
talking
now.
myself back out of it. Because, okay, so Rolls-Royces, all of the engineer into that engine to be silent and to be wonderful, so they kind of are the soul of those engines, but they can't achieve what an electric car can.
No.
And to that end, electric Rolls-Royce Shadow, dare I say, would make a lot of sense.
So the only downside, though...
Weight is going to be a massive thing, because they're heavy already, and then you've got to...
They weren't exactly light. I mean, you won't be going over a local bridge, any local bridge, and you're going to have to go around the long way round.
But you've also got to think about how you're upgrading the suspension and the brakes to cope with the extra weight that they weren't in the first place. The other thing you've got is that what you get, particularly with a DS, because the engine is horrendously noisy, particularly in mine, is that the engine's masking a lot of other noises. So once you lose that engine noise, you get a lot of rattles and squeaks and shudders. So you imagine you're going to be gliding along in this serene... what you actually get is... where you're hearing all the things you wouldn't have heard.
Gobble, gobble and tweet, tweet.
Well, quite, exactly. There you go.
Right, that is it for us. Thank you so much for being with us,
My
Alex,
pleasure. Thank you
and
for having
throwing some light onto new and old cars. And Matthew,
Yes.
would you like the last word, darling?
I should always have the last word. I won't, you're still chirping.
I know, well.
Tweet. Okay, so as you watch this, we'll be consigning for our summer auction at Windsor in July. So please do get in contact if you have a classic car or you just want to have a look at the value that we think that your car could pull at auction, of course. And equally, if you want to come and see us in July, do go on the website historics.co.uk. All information is there. The guys can come and help. That's no obligation, so please do get in contact. And equally, of course, get on those socials, like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and look for our other podcasts that we also film and intro videos. So yes, please follow us.
Lovely stuff. And I have got the last word. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.